Hey guys, Czech future tense can be quite a challenge, but let me walk you through the system and show you how it all works, and I'm sure that in the end it will all make sense. There are two types of future tense in Czech. Which type we use depends on the aspect of the verb. Czech verbs most commonly come in pairs where one of them has perfective aspect and the other is imperfective. If the verb is perfective, its present form expresses the future. So let's take a pair of verbs, psát, which means to write and is imperfective, and napsat, which is also to write, but it is perfective. Both of them belong to the same verb class or group. Their present forms are já píšu, já napíšu, ty píšeš, ty napíšeš, on, ona to píše, on, ona to napíše. My píšeme, my napíšeme. Vy píšete, vy napíšete. Oni, oni, ona píšou, oni, oni, ona napíšou. In the case of imperfective psát, these forms really express the present. Já píšu email. I'm writing an email. However, perfective verbs like napsat don't express the present. These forms actually automatically express the future. Já napíšu email. I will write an email. If I want to say, for example, they will write an email, we have to just choose the correct present ending of the perfective verb napsat and say, oni napíšou email. As you know, the subject pronoun is often dropped, so we can say píšu email, napíšu email, napíšou email. So the good news is, if you learn the present forms of the various verb groups, you will know how to make the future tense of perfective verbs. I've covered both of these topics in previous videos, topics of present tense and the aspect. That's why we are not going too deep on these topics now. In case you are not familiar with all the present tense endings or how perfective and imperfective verbs work, I'll leave links down in the description for you to check out. Let's take another pair of verbs, platit and zaplatit. They both mean to pay, but platit is imperfective and zaplatit is perfective. I pay, or I'm paying, would be já platím. I will pay is já zaplatím. He is paying, on platí. He will pay, on zaplatí, and so on. So that's really cool. We can just find the right perfective verb and use it in its present form to express future. That is often true because usually there are these pairs of perfective and imperfective verbs, but sometimes when we want to focus on the duration of the future activity, or when we want to emphasize that it's not necessarily going to be finished inside the contextual time frame of the future sentence, we might need to use an imperfective verb in future. Like when I want to say something like, I will be writing emails the whole day. Imperfective verbs in future are much easier to handle than perfective verbs. You just need to combine the auxiliary být in its future forms, já budu, and the infinitive of the full meaning verb. Já budu psát e-maily celý den. Again, dropping the subject pronoun, budu psát e-maily celý den. Of course, even this compound future is person-specific, and that means that we have to use the right form of být. Já budu, ty budeš, on, ona to bude. My budeme, vy budete, oni, oni, ona budou. So, já budu psát, ty budeš psát, on, ona to bude psát. My budeme psát, vy budete psát, oni, oni, ona budou psát. Now, let's have a look at some examples of future in both perfective and imperfective verbs. Zavolám mu večer. I will call him in the evening. We use the perfective variant zavolat. Budu mu volat večer. I'll be calling him in the evening, and that's an imperfective volat. Přečtu tu knihu. I will read and finish the book. That's a perfective variant přečíst. Budu číst tu knihu celý víkend. I will be reading the book all weekend. That's an imperfective číst. It's really important not to mix these two types of future. For example, using the compound future with a perfective verb just sounds wrong. So that's one case when we need to use the compound imperfective future. Another case is when the imperfective verb simply has no perfective counterpart. Fortunately, there are very few such verbs. And good example is pracovat, to work. Pracovat doesn't have its perfective equivalent, and so when I want to say I'll work, I again need to use the compound future tense. Já budu pracovat, ty budeš pracovat, on, ona to bude pracovat. My budeme pracovat, vy budete pracovat, oni, oni, ona budou pracovat. Another verb of this type is meet, to have. For future, we have to use the compound form with být. Já budu mít, ty budeš mít, on, ona to bude mít, and so on. There is no perfective variant of this verb. Another very common imperfective verb that doesn't have its perfective counterpart is muset, must, or have to. So again, in future, já budu muset, ty budeš muset, on, ona to bude muset, and so on. However, muset is actually very often used in its present form, even when we talk about future. So, zítra budeme muset jít do práce, or zítra musíme jít do práce. Both mean we'll have to go to work tomorrow. So that's one type of irregularity, verbs that are aspectually imperfective but have no perfective partner. Another type, also aspect related, involves verbs of motion, yet and yeet, to go by vehicle and to go on foot. They are imperfective but cannot be used in compound future with the auxiliary být. Instead, they form special future-only forms. Yet, in future, changes into já pojedu, ty pojedeš, on, ona to pojede. My pojedeme, vy pojedete, oni, oni, ona pojedou. Jít transforms into já půjdu, ty půjdeš, on, ona to půjde. My půjdeme, vy půjdete, oni, oni, ona půjdou. These forms behave like perfective verbs because they express the future directly. But as I said, they are only used for the future. You cannot use these forms in any other tense or even as an infinitive. Well, actually, their infinitives are really yet and yeet. You probably noticed that these future forms look just like forms of yet and yeet in present, only with the prefixes po and pu. These, of course, belong to the group 4 present tense conjugation. Questions are again made with the right intonation. Napíšeš ten email? Budeš psát ten email? Meaning, will you write the email? Negative sentences are made by adding ne. to the verbs. Nenapíšu ten email, nebudu psát ten email, meaning I won't write the email. As you can see, in the compound imperfective future, we add ne to the auxiliary být, never to the full meaning verb. Nebudeme pracovat, we will not work. Petr nebude psát ten email. Petr will not write the email. Alright, before we jump into the test, let me summarize the topic. Czech has two types of future tense. One for perfective verbs and one for imperfective verbs. Perfective verbs express the future using their present tense forms. No auxiliary needed. For example, napíšu email. I will write an email. Imperfective verbs use the compound future, which means using the future forms of být plus infinitive. For example, budu psát email, I'll be writing an email. We use perfective verbs when the focus is on the completion of the action. We use imperfective verbs when we emphasize the duration, repetition, or process. Some imperfective verbs have no perfective pair, like pracovat, mít, or muset. These always use the compound future. Motion verbs jet and jít are imperfective but have special future-only forms pojedu, půjdu. Negation is made by adding ne to the full meaning verb in single word perfective future, nenapíšu ten email, and adding ne to the auxiliary být in compound imperfective future. Nebudu psát ten email. Questions are formed using intonation. For example, napíšeš ten email? Budeš psát ten email? Now's a great time to check the description below and click the link to download all the tables we used in this video. If you're ready, I'll give you a sentence where you'll need to use the correct future form of a given verb. Sometimes the subject pronoun is going to be in parentheses. That means that it is dropped. You'll have a short moment to think, and then I'll show and say the correct sentence myself. There are 10 sentences in total. Let's do it. On napíše ten e-mail. Zítra budu psát ten e-mail. Zaplatíš ten účet? Petr jí zavolá po práci. Zítra nebudeme pracovat. Celý víkend budu číst tu novou knihu. Přečtete si tu zprávu zítra ráno? Budeš mít čas na oběd? Oni budou muset odejít brzy. Zítra nepůjdou do školy. I'm sure you did a great job. I hope this video brought a bit of clarity into the complicated world of verb tenses. Hit like and subscribe and check the description for a full blog post with today's downloadable tables, exercises and more. Thanks a lot for watching and see you in the next video.